Two of the main words in the Bible are mercy and grace. We're so thankful that God has mercy and grace on us. But I often wondered, what's the difference between mercy and grace? And believe it or not, I learned the difference when I was just a little boy. When my brother and I were living in Bolivar, Tennessee, there was a man who worked at the hospital for the summer. He was from Great Britain. Well, we had no idea where Great Britain was or what it was. All we knew was that he really talked funny. He had a very proper and distinct British accent. Of course, we never thought we had an accent, but I'm sure he had lots of fun thinking about listening to us talk. But we just decided we would torment this man. And we did everything we could to make his life miserable for most of that summer that he lived in. He actually lived in the house that we were living in. He lived upstairs. We lived downstairs. And he would set his shoes outside his door. And we had great delight in putting rocks and things like that in his shoe. In fact, one time we even put a dead mouse in his shoe. That was so mean of us. But we just were being mean little boys, actually. And he always wore a little derby hat, a little hat that just kind of had a derby hat. You know what a derby hat is. And so he was, one day he was walking along on the other side of a fence, and we could just see that little hat just bobbing along like that. And it was about a 6-foot fence, 5.5-foot fence. And so I said, "Hey, Don, let's knock Mr. McCoy's hat off." And he said, "Okay." So we picked up a couple of rocks or a handful of rocks, and I said, "When he gets to about right here, we'll throw and we'll knock his hat off." And so 1, 2, 3, and we threw, and sure enough, Don's rock got there first and knocked his hat right off his head. Well, my rock got there second and hit Mr. McCoy right on the head. And he yelled, and we could tell he was really mad. He didn't much like us anyway because we had tormented him so much. And so since he was walking this way, we decided we would run this way and peek around the fence so we could see what was going on. Well, he was smarter than we reckoned, because when we ran this way, he ran this way too. And when we got to the end of the fence and we stuck our face around the fence, there we were looking right into the eyes of a very angry Mr. McCoy. And he grabbed me by one arm, and he grabbed Donald by one arm, and he jerked us around that fence, and he said, "Boys, I'm so tired of you tormenting me." We didn't even know what torment meant, but that's what we'd been doing. And he looked at us, and we were just terrified. And he said, "You know what I ought to do to you boys?" And of course, we knew what he ought to do. He ought to tell our dad what we had done, and that would have really, really gotten us in a lot of trouble. But he looked at us, and I guess he saw the terror in our eyes, and he turned loose of our arm, and he said, "You know what I'm going to do with you boys?" We said, "No, sir, what?" He said, "I'm going to take you over here to Frosty Land, and I'm going to buy you an ice cream cone. Come on." And he turned and started walking toward Frosty Land, a little ice cream stand, not just maybe 50 feet from where we were. And my feet were saying, "Run." But ice cream was saying, "Come on," because I love ice cream. And so I said, "Come on, Don, let's go." And we followed Mr. McCoy over there, and he walked up to the stand, and he said, "I want 2 ice cream cones for my friends here." Well, we looked around to see if somebody else had showed up, because we sure didn't think he would be calling us his friends. And they got a couple of ice cream cones, and he handed them to us. We took it and said, "Thank you." And then he reached in his pocket. By the way, ice cream cones were a nickel each back then. And he reached in his pocket, and he took out 2 nickels. And he said, "Here, boys, here's you another nickel so you can buy you some ice cream tomorrow." And we said, "Thank you." And I want you to know from that day on, we never did anything to Mr. McCoy again. In fact, we even tried to shine his shoes one time. We didn't do a very good job, but it was a loving effort on our part. And I learned that day that he showed us mercy and grace. Because mercy is when you don't get what you do deserve. And grace is when you do get what you don't deserve. And when Mr. McCoy looked at us and said, you know what you boys deserve? You deserve a whipping. But he didn't give us a whipping, and our daddy didn't even find out about it. That was mercy. And then when he bought us the ice cream cone, that was grace. And in the same way, when God looks at us, he says, you know what you deserve? You deserve judgment and punishment. But he said, I'm not going to give that to you. I'm going to give that to my son, and I'm going to give you grace. And so that's how I learned the difference between mercy and grace.